And there's nobody better to talk about what's going on, not just at the Air Force Academy, but across the entire military services than Colonel Ron Scott. He showed up at Freedom Summit for us to talk about what they've been doing under his leadership as the CEO and president of STARS, standing together against racism and radicalism in the services. They're an organization I think is maybe getting to 5 years old, and they've been really taking on the DEI, the wokeness in the academies. And I mean, Colonel Scott, you're great on this issue because you know what? You graduated from the Air Force Academy, so hey, you can dish on them all day long. I do find it's interesting. You flew C-130s. I wonder if I ever jumped out of one of the C-130s you flew. Probably not. Anyway. All right. Thanks for coming on to this program. What did you think of the Hegseth nomination? And in particular, isn't Senator Schmidt exactly right about what you're seeing in the academies and in the military writ large?
Absolutely, Jeannie. And thanks for having me on. I'll tell you, Pete Hegseth is the right person for this position because, people are casting him as, hey, this guy's a Fox News newscaster. Mm-hmm. Well, when they take a deeper look at his background, he's an intellectual. He's written books. Everybody is familiar with his War on Warriors, and STARS had a great input in some of the evidence that he presents in that book. But before that, it was a battle for the American mind. And people don't realize that what we're up against is a pretty significant change in our culture. It's creeped up on us, and now all of a sudden we're realizing things don't seem to be the way they should. And so more and more people are starting to take a look at what's been happening over time, and it's all tied to this wokeness, this critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as you take a deeper look at it, it has tremendously irrefutable Marxist roots, starting with the Frankfurt School at Columbia University in the 1930s. These were scholars from Germany that escaped Nazi Germany because Nazism and communism were sort of opponents. And so they come to America and they want to push Marxism, but they realized that the large middle class that we had was resistant to that. So they had to modify that in terms of political identity groups. So they advanced Marxism in the terms of critical theory, then it became critical legal theory, then critical race theory. And that's the philosophical foundation for the praxis, the diversity, equity, inclusion now that we're up against. And so more and more people are becoming aware of it. And fortunately, because of that awareness, I think we're going to be able to stem it and then eventually defeat it.
So I think that, I was in the 8th class to graduate women out of West Point, and I didn't really understand that until many, many, many years after I'd graduated. I had never just actually done the math to see how new it was. And I think probably it's because my generation grew up just playing sports. And, when you're one of 6 kids and there's 2 girls and 4 boys, I mean, you just kind of you're just competing all the time. You just are. It's just truth. And, we're all decent athletes. I was probably the worst, but you just kind of grew up around it. So you didn't really think anything of it, but apparently was still pretty new. And I look at what has become this impetus to really get women into leadership positions, to get minorities into leadership positions, to maybe promote them ahead of other more qualified folks. I mean, it's been going on for a while is what I'm saying. I didn't feel it so much that was the case when I was at West Point, but I do feel like it's even went before. I mean, Barack Obama really elevated that push. He started it much more aggressively, I think, but I think it's been going on for a couple decades. Am I right or wrong?
No, absolutely. In fact, it's really manifested at different levels. This really started back in the 1930s.
Oh.
And it was Herbert Marcuse, who was part of the Frankfurt School, ends up at the University of California, San Diego. Remember, there was I'm trying to remember her name, Davis. She was a communist. She was one of his acolytes. And so Herbert Marcuse probably could be considered the patron saint of the the CRT DEI movement in America, and that was in the 1960s. So it dates back a few decades. But it was under Obama that this really was taken to the next level. And it started in the fall of 2008 when the Black Congressional Caucus chartered the Military Leadership Diversity Commission in the National Defense Authorization Act. And this was without any debate. Mm-hmm. And so they stand up this commission, and they now all of a sudden demonstrate that they can discriminate with the goal of equity and get away with it. And so in March of 2011, when they published their final report, they were explicit about the importance of discriminating to achieve equity. And then they went further to say that assimilation was bad because it subordinated subcultural differences. And so that was a shock and awe in terms of changing our whole philosophy here in America. And 5 months later, in August of 2011, President Obama issued an executive order establishing diversity and inclusion personnel and programs across the entire federal government. They used the Department of Defense as a petri dish for this. They got away with it. Then they fully deployed it in August of 2011.
Okay, there's so much to talk to you about. By the way, I think you're talking about Angela Davis.
Yes, Angela Davis.
Yeah, Angela Davis, the Black Marxist. Yeah, well, the middle school that is literally 6 houses down from my house in Wheaton, Illinois, home of Wheaton College, put Angela Davis quotes all over the T-shirt for celebrating Black History Month. So that's where I live. That's how bad it has gotten. Our middle school did this. Okay, we're going to be right back with Colonel Ron Scott. Got so much to talk about him still. Want to get to the bank's announcement on how he's going to end race-based admissions to the military academies. This is Jeannie Ives. This is The Real Story. We'll be right back. All right. Thanks for joining me tonight on this Sunday night. It's going to be a monumental day tomorrow. Wow. Get ready. I think we're at like about T-minus 15 hours and before Trump's going to be sworn into office. And then the nation can start to heal. And I mean that quite sincerely. I mean, there's so much work to be done. And it means also that you folks at the local level have to do your job, too. Now, I have on the line with me still Colonel Scott. And honestly, his bio is so long. It's 3 pages long. I want you to go to Stars and read it. But he's just a phenomenal guy, an intellectual, a retired professor of public policy. He was a scientist at one point. Of course, he was a colonel. He commanded a C-130 unit, just an amazing man. And now he runs STARS organization. And we had played the the Schmidt DEI clip, and then Hegseth responded to that. Here was Hegseth's response to how he's going to fix things after Senator Schmidt teed it up.
How are you going to fix it?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. First and foremost, up front, you have to tear out DEI and CRT initiatives, root and branch out of institutions.
100%.
And then you have to put in Army, Navy, and Air Force secretaries and others, civilian positions at the helm who are committed to the same priorities that the President of the United States is, and if confirmed, the Secretary of Defense will be. Send a clear message that this is not a time for equity. Equity is a very different word than equality. Equality is the bedrock of our military. Men and women, duty positions in uniform, black, white, doesn't matter. We treat you equally based on who you are in the image of God as an individual. And we all get the same bad haircuts.
Well, there you have it. And, part of that, he's going to get a lot of help. And one of those people he's going to get help from is now Senator Banks from Indiana, who put it together an amendment that reads, racially biased admission policies are always wrong, but when used by our military academies, they risk lives and weaken our national security too. Our military must uphold the essential American principle of equal opportunity. And with that, he is having hearings on race-based admissions and going to put legislation in place to stop it. So this is just one of the fixes. There's a lot to unpack in Hegseth's response to Schmidt. Colonel Scott, I mean, this is not going to be easy, is it? But we have to do it.
Yeah, it's and we're going to have to do some unpleasant things. Stars was asked to head up a warrior board to take a look at our flag officers, our senior officers in the military, and to purge. That was the word that was used, to purge our senior ranks of those general officers that were part of the problem. And Stars pushed back on that. We said we want to avoid any sense of a purge. But what we need to do is to set up a panel to take a look at our leadership within the military to ensure that the general officers, the admirals that we have, understand the essence of our Constitution, and that what President Trump wants to bring in, what Pete Hegseth wants to bring in as the Secretary of Defense, that truly promotes merit and not distracted by this ideological craziness called DEI. And so I think we're on a right path right now. I think there's going to be an emphasis on accountability and to make sure that we have purified our senior ranks so that as we move forward, we can focus on meritocracy and readiness, because we have some very serious adversaries out there in the international system. And right now we are extremely vulnerable if we don't work through this cancer and get us back on the right path.
But how does that actually look from a command approach? What do you envision occurring? Because again, commanders have a lot of control. And, the battalion commanders, look, they can make or break a company commander's career, no doubt. And it goes on up the rail. So, I mean, you have to, how are you going to actually make this work?
Well, that's a good question, Jeannie. There's going to be basically an effort to frame this in the right way. Obviously, we have to provide stability and continuity. We can't take a time out and say, hey, we're going to work through this for several months. So we have to work this as the train is rattling down the tracks. So we have to take a look at probably a graduated scale of conditions. First of all, are there individuals that have violated the law? If they have, then they'll be held accountable, court-martialed or asked to retire. And then we have those that felt like they had to obey the political order of the day, even though they may have disagreed with it. But they realized that, wow, it was wrong, and we have an opportunity to correct that. So there would be some redemption there. But it's going to be an important thing to set up properly, because the last thing we need to do is to look like a banana republic where we just come in and we start cleaning house, ridding those that appear to have different political views than those in charge. So, I mean, this is America. America is a land of law, and we have to make sure that we pursue actions that are consistent with our laws, but also hold people accountable.
Well, certainly, like for the beginning part, when Eric Schmidt was basically laying out that, they have speech codes at the Air Force Academy saying you can't, you're not using mom and dad. They've got cadets that are apparently wearing purple armbands, and they're the enforcers for these types of speech codes. I mean, obviously, you change that out on day one. That's easy. That's really easy. That's a very visible sign, and that's going to end. That's going to be, I think, that ends. I think it's harder. The race-based admissions, I think that's harder. That's almost embedded in their processes for admissions, and there might have to be lawsuits over there. Already currently lawsuits over that. How about accountability, though, for exactly what happened at Abbey Gate in the Afghanistan withdrawal? I mean, if there are, to what level of commanders who were in charge that day, if they're still in service, should they just be retired?
No. In fact, we're recommending that there be an after-action review of Afghanistan.
Okay.
So that's to be determined. But I'll tell you, as we speak, we're getting all kinds of reports from cadets at the Air Force Academy. I live 7 miles from the Air Force Academy, that they're already seeing a change in the culture. So there's a recognition that, hey, we need to make some changes, and they're anticipating that there will be changes coming down the road. So that's a good sign.
Well, it's also a good sign that Trump picked up Lieutenant Colonel Matt Lohmeyer for a senior civilian leadership post as an undersecretary for the Air Force. Do you know what his specific duties are going to be? I mean, he was so outspoken on the Marxism, the wokeness, the indoctrination going on, and of course he got fired over it, or had to leave the Air Force over it, or Space Force. I'm sorry, but what is he actually going to be doing?
Wow, I'll tell you, Jeannie, we are so proud that Matt got picked up. You know, Matt is the executive vice president under me at STARS. Matt is a modern Billy Mitchell. What he did was so courageous at the time. And so he'll have a 4-star that will be under him when he becomes confirmed as the Undersecretary of the Air Force. Now, I have not talked to Matt about this, but Matt is a man of faith. He's not someone that's prone to retribution or that sort of thing. He's visionary. He's strategic. His focus is on what's best for the Department of Defense in America. And so it will be interesting to see how that plays out. Now, I will tell you that there was a individual that when President Trump came out with his cease and desist order on CRT and DEI trainings, the base commander, where he was a squadron commander, pursued these trainings. And when Matt confronted him about it, he basically said, Trump is going to be gone in a couple months, and we're doing the right thing.
All right. Hey, Colonel Scott, we've got to leave it right there. But obviously what you just illustrated right there is that the chain of command is everything. It's everything. And we got to root out the bad people in those chains of command. Thanks so much for joining me on The Real Story. We'll be right back after this break.